problem with this answer choice now that I realize is that all communities is way too generic. It's just like uh, expanding to all communities. However, here we were talking about the article, the author talks about poor people and their communities, not middle class communities or upper class communities. So, therefore, all communities is just too broad of an answer. That's why choice A, traditional economic theory, is too distrusting, would be a better answer. The current economic system actively creates poverty. That would not be a good choice because it's just beyond the information in the passage. So the like the passage is not saying that the current economic system, the capitalism, is actively creating poverty. That's not like an expectation, a reasonable expectation for someone who accepts Muhammad Yunus's views on lending would be that. So also microloans will eventually make themselves unnecessary. Um, I was hesitating on this answer, but it's just too broad. It's beyond the information in the passage. The passage highlights the effectiveness of microloans as alternative banking system, but it does not discuss the future of microloans. So we might want to assume that they could eventually make themselves unnecessary if they eliminate poverty. However, paragraph 6 says that microloans do not try to eliminate poverty, rather, they allow poor people to help one another. The passage does not provide enough information to conclude that. But for choice A, it's better than the rest since traditional economic theory is too distrusting, and it was shown in paragraph 5. As it says that Yunus's strategy of microlending flew in the face of traditional economic theory in practice. Rather than expect that poor people would not be able to pay off a loan, Yunus assumed that they would. So, a reasonable expectation for someone who accepts Yunus's view would be traditional economic theory is too distrusting. And not all communities can be made trustworthy. Yeah, that seems a better answer than this one. But the rest, we got them right. Underbanked communities. For this one, I didn't choose how many people will eventually become wealthy because it was not the goal was not for to make poor people wealthy, but to just help each other out. And the last answer is just like too much of a quantitative metric, and it was not discussed in the passage. And it doesn't show, yeah, it doesn't show how much money each person got. Maybe the middle class person got money too. We don't. This is not the discussion. Discussion is like whether or not micro lenders consistently funded their poorest community members. that microlending addresses the problems with capitalism. Paragraph 2 says that the basic purpose of financial system is to move money from the rich to the poor. However, capitalism has failed to do this. If microlending can make money available to poor people, it would show that Yunus's innovations address the problems with capitalism. This answer would indicate whether or not microlending is moving money to those who need it. If microlenders consistently fund their poorest community members, it would provide evidence that money is reaching the poor. It would help determine the effectiveness of Yunus's innovations to address the problems with capitalism. Cool. That one was a tricky one. Oh, fuck. Jesus. Come on, based on class. Ah, that's not right. Oh. So the question was asking, what does the author consider the appropriate relationship? So the wrong relationship that was discussed in the passage was like in the airline stowage to passengers, because you can treat first class passengers different than to business class or like economy class, right? It's the opposite. So why not A? Equal resources to victims of domestic violence. They say that focusing on white victims cause minority. Sports announcers are likely to focus their attention on certain players rather than all players equally. That's not true. The amount of attention given can depend on an athlete's performance. Okay. Therefore, they do not distribute their attention and resources equally to all athletes. So they do not align with the author's argument that resources should be distributed equally. I mean, still, parents could have prejudice towards one child over the other. Yeah, not a good question in my opinion. Like A and B still could both be answers, though I chose C as the wrong answer because I thought the opposite. Now, this one we got right. Rates of domestic violence among minority women are quite low. That would weaken the argument of the author. Now let's figure out why. 3 is wrong and 1 is correct. The main idea was domestic violence advocates ignore minority women. Domestic violence advocates ignore minority women. Okay. So this statement 1 is correct because it aligns with the main idea. The main idea is domestic violence advocates ignore minority victims. The author argues that advocates increase awareness of domestic violence in the white community by assuming domestic abuse is a minority problem. Paragraph 1 suggested this need for increased awareness because people do not expect domestic violence to occur in white communities. Paragraph 2 says that people believe that domestic violence is primarily a problem in minority families. Therefore, domestic violence advocates try to popularize the notion that people of all races experience domestic violence to highlight that it also happens in white communities. This statement aligns with the information in the passage and is correct. Therefore, domestic violence advocates try to popularize the notion that people of all races experience domestic violence to highlight that it also happens in white communities, because people think battery does not happen in white communities. Let's see why 3 is incorrect. This statement is incorrect because the passage does not discuss how people understand the violence of domestic violence. because it draws attention to the violence of domestic violence. It draws attention to the violence of domestic violence. It's not about the nature of the violence. Now I get it. I think I read it wrong. It instead focuses on how domestic violence advocates distribute attention among victims. If the passage argues that focusing on experience of white women means violence against minority women is ignored. Violence against wealthier white victims receives more attention, but the passage does not say that domestic violence in general draws more attention. This statement does not align with the main idea of the passage. And 2 is correct because it aligns with the information passage. The main idea is domestic violence. The author argues that advocacy creates awareness of domestic violence in white community by assuming domestic abuse is a minority problem. The passage describes how lawmakers have done this to support legislation against domestic violence. Paragraph 3 says that shifting attention away from minority victims and toward white victims works as a political appeal to rally white elites. He gives the example of Senator Boren's comments to show that popularizing the notion that people of all races can be abused helps pass anti-domestic violence legislation. The statement aligns with the main idea because doing so helps pass anti-domestic violence legislation. Okay, I accept that. Now this one. This answer is closest to the main idea. The main idea is that domestic violence advocates the ignore minority women. The author says that advocates increase awareness of domestic violence in the black community by claiming women of all races and classes can experience domestic abuse. However, by doing this, advocates ignore the experience of minority victims. While they argue that all people suffer domestic violence, they do to focus on a certain type of domestic violence victims. They focus on the wealthier white victims, so the author would likely agree that people who say all usually mean some. This answer may seem to align with the author's argument. The author does not want all victims to be fairly recognized. However, this answer actually contradicts what the author is saying. The author suggests that a crime done to all domestic violence takes attention away from crimes done to one minority victims. The author argues the strength of the appeal to protect our women must be its race and class specificity. In other words, the author thinks advocates should address domestic violence in specific communities. They do not think victims should be generalized. Thus, we can eliminate this answer. Well, I implied this answer as if a crime is done to one, aka the minority, it is done to all. So that's what all the white communities, supremacists or senators should, this is how they should view it, but they're not. And it still makes sense in my head, but how Jack Wilson is interpreting that is that the author, this is the opposite, is contradicting it, because the author says that a crime done to all, basically domestic violence, takes attention away from the domestic violence that happened to the minority victims. I did choose B because the Violence Act against Women Act, there was nowhere in the passage that it says or assumes that the Violence Act mostly protects white domestic violence victims. This legislation was made happen because it happened in the white victims, but it's not. It's the goal of that act is not to protect the white victims, and racism was not nowhere there, so we cannot call him a racist because he legislated that act, and we don't know if it became a law. There was nowhere we can assume it, but we can assume he's white since it was the author says that it worked primarily as a political appeal to rally white elites. So let's see. This manner of speaking may lead legislation to mostly benefit white. It may lead. The last paragraph suggests that women of all color will not benefit from such legislation equally. However, this answer refers to the act mentioned. Paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 does not indicate that the specific legislation only protects white victims. Exactly. The passage does not give readers a specific enough sense of what the act actually does for this answer to be correct. We do not know what the effects of this particular law are on white, but we must protect our women, he says. So the author claims this work as a political area. If the paragraph says that both type of victims, it can assume that he's not a minority. He's appealing to white elites to protect white women. Cool. So about the relationship, the appropriate relationship, I got it the opposite way. For this one, people say all usually means some. That's also true. Hmm. This guy's name is even Senator B. Senator Boren. So nice touch. No worries, let's keep our spirits up and do this one, I think. I have done this one. And then yeah, we have like 25 minutes, so let's finish this. I'm gonna do this one out loud. From essential to the stage, or not maybe. Nice. 100%. Hungover. Me neither. I didn't know what a feel was. You must not be from round these parts, brother. No, I know what a feel is a violin, but has a connotation of being country folky. Violins play in orchestras, which are connotatively elite. Fiddlers play in small bands. I know what a fiddle is from the south and change my answer from correct to incorrect. The description trained versus formerly untrained and illiterate made me lean towards student or versus teacher or child versus adults, but now I guess it makes sense. But it's not the blues man to jazz man. It's blues to jazz. So student to teacher is not the correct answer. Cool, we got 100% on this one. And by the way, the main idea. Just a second, the main idea was, so if we wanted to come up with the main idea was that, yeah, it was the first question, that blues was associated with low economic status. 100% nice. Feels good. Okay, cool. I'll take a water break and be right back. We did our 3 passages for cards that we intended to. So, cards, 3 passages. Not pigs. No, not pigs. Cool. We can do a bunch of these in the next few hours. Peace for now.